And it is the Saturday Coffee Klatch with Heather Lofthouse and yours truly, Robert Reich. Heather, it has been another very, very hard week. What are we going to be talking about today?
Thank God I get to talk to you. So I want to frame two big questions. What is Trump doing is one we need answered. And then what can we do as people who feel a responsibility to the common good? What can we do? And can we please obviously start with this horrific plane crash in D.C. and Trump's response?
Well, I mean, the plane crash was horrific enough. Obviously, it's the first major crash, major civilian deaths we've seen in this country for decades. But Trump's response, instead of being a president that actually shows some compassion to
compassion.
Any compassion. I mean, the people, the pilots, the air, anybody who was involved. What is he? He is incapable of compassion, and he starts off right away. I mean, almost his second or third sentence, blaming. And here's the important thing: he goes back to DEI. That is his nemesis: diversity, equity, and inclusion. And he says, and this is the thing that I thought was absolutely amazing. I mean, he exposed what he really means by DEI. He said because a lot of people were rejected to be air traffic controllers because they were, quote, too white, unquote. And then he says we need competent people. We shouldn't worry about DEI. And then Hegseth, fresh from his one vote, a narrow victory in the Senate, now defense secretary, he chimes in about DEI. And then Vance chimes in about DEI. And the implication is that if you have, any kind of a system that has black people or Latino people, you're not going to get the competence. You're not going to get the qualifications. I mean, this is really dangerous. It's not only inappropriate and sickening. It's shameful.
But it's also women. It's also women, right? And it's But is it purely bigotry? I mean, yes, it is racist. It is race baiting. It is awful, right?
Yes, it's bigotry. I mean, bigotry.
But it's more than that, right? I mean, this happened on his watch, but he cannot be a vulnerable person. He cannot be vulnerable enough to have passion or empathy. So what is he doing here, Bob? What's the bigger picture around this strategy?
Every time he goes after DEI, you've got to understand, he is using racism. And then every time he uses racism, you've got to understand it is a divide and conquer strategy. And by that I mean he wants Americans to be angry at each other. Women against men and blacks against whites and Democrats against Republicans, Republicans against Democrats. He likes us to be angry because if we are angry, Heather, at each other, we don't look up and see where all the money and the power are going. This is the classic Trump strategy. He started this in his first term, and this is the divide and I call it divide and conquer because it's really used by Trump and the oligarchy, because as they siphon power and wealth to themselves, to Trump, to Musk, and so on, they just don't want us to see it. They want us fighting. They want to blame each other. That's what it is.
Now,
this is what.
So I studied public policy with you, and you basically learned there are 8 steps to take as you're analyzing a situation to figure out what you do. And the first step you take is to define the problem, because oftentimes you think maybe something has to do with a food shortage, but then you realize it's related to a housing shortage or whatever. The number one public policy step is not blame everyone else around you, do executive orders against the people before you so that you don't have to take responsibility. I mean, it's so blatant that critical thinking is out, right? And brawn and impulsiveness and bigotry is in. And this is this larger push that he's doing.
Well, it's also, it's Trump. I'm not responsible. But what did he do? Before the crash, in the 2 weeks before the crash, what has he done? He has sacked the head of the Transportation Security Administration. He disbanded the Aviation Security Advisory Committee. He failed to name an acting head of the Federal Aviation Administration. He imposed a hiring freeze on the government, including a freeze on hiring additional air traffic controllers. I mean, if anybody is to blame, and I'm not in a blame game. Don't get me wrong. But Trump is certainly right in the middle of this, as is Musk.
And that's what I was going to say. The person who encouraged, allegedly, that the previous Whitaker FAA chief be out is Musk. And part of that is because they're in charge of SpaceX and they issue a lot of fines around launch times and all of it. I mean, SpaceX happens in the air and the FAA is in charge of that. So there was influence there.
Oh, and Musk has been feuding with the FAA over SpaceX for a long time. And the January 1st, as soon as Trump is sworn in, what happens? Whitaker is out at the FAA. I mean, let's be clear. Let's just be grown up about what's going on. There's no question that Musk was behind that. So you have an FAA that is basically already understaffed, already has problems, and the head of it is now gone. And the advisory committee is gone, and Trump doesn't want to take any responsibility. He certainly doesn't want to show any compassion. So what does he do? He blames DEI.
Yep.
I mean,
it's horrific.
It's sickening. Heather, it is sickening.
I know. Okay, so then yesterday we have another top official who's now resigning, who was at the Treasury Department. That was David Liebrick, who said, I'm out. I'm not dealing with Doge. I'm not giving up the passwords and the keys to our financial payment systems. Tell us about that. What's happening at the federal level in terms of all these workers?
Well, it's very, very interesting with regard. I mean, he was the acting Treasury Secretary. He was put into the job 2 weeks ago by Trump. This is not exactly a problem of Trump loyalty, except he said, this fellow who was acting Treasury Secretary, he said to Musk, I'm not going to give you the keys to the kingdom. I am not going to turn over the access to the federal payments system. This is where you're talking about trillions of dollars a year are going through this payment system, including Social Security checks and Medicare checks and everything else. I'm not going to give you all of this data and all of this information because you should not use it. You should not get it. And your minions, none of you has been confirmed. None of you is under congressional authority. None of you has any kind of public accountability. Why should I give it to you? And what happens then? Musk insists and his minions insist. And then this guy, I think, he has no choice. I mean, if anybody has any ounce of integrity left, they have to essentially resign, which is what this guy did. I mean,
no, they press eject. And then there's all this pressure. So there's pressures for buyouts. Should we call them bully outs? I mean, they're just bullying all of these federal employees, 2.3 million of them. I read that in your Substack this week when you wrote them a letter saying this is a scam. I mean, tell us more about that. You were in a cabinet. You ran a giant department. This is unprecedented, right?
It is unprecedented. And this is something that happened. Musk, on Tuesday, and then again, it just happened on Thursday. Musk, impersonating essentially the Office of Personnel Management, sends out to 2.3 million of federal workers, basically what looks like an offer. If you quit by February 6th, you can get 8 months of pay right through to September 30th, and you don't have to risk being furloughed, that is laid off without pay, and you don't have to risk being fired. A pretty good deal. Now, what is behind this? The real story behind this, besides the fact that Musk is doing stuff that he has no business doing, but the other story behind this is that this is a way not of shrinking the government. This is a way of putting Trump loyalists into all of these civil service positions. Musk is, first of all, it's absolutely illegal. I mean, I can tell you, as a former cabinet secretary, I did not have the authority to give people 8 or 9 months of kind of future pay if they were going to resign.
Right, just a furlough free-for-all.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I mean, a furlough free-for-all is about it. But no department, no agency has that authority. And you can't get the money from any other agency because Congress does not give you the authority to change the money. OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, doesn't have that authority. And if you get to late March and there's no money because the debt ceiling has not been raised, you're out of luck if you've taken this offer. I mean, no federal employee should take this offer. You should say, they should say, what's the word? What was said? Nuts. Absolutely no. Wrong. I won't do it.
Now, how many employees did you oversee? How many were part of your labor department? Thousands.
There were, let's see if I can remember, 600,000, 700,000, something like that.
Wow. Think about that. Think about that.
Well, you can think about it. It was a lot of pressure.
I'd rather not think about it. Yeah,
but it was stressful. It was very stressful. Yeah.
But the themes we're hitting on over and over today, just looking at the news and what Trump is doing, is power and control and power grabbing, right?
And that's right. The consolidation of power. That's what's going on here. The divide and conquer strategy is all about getting us angry at each other so we don't see where the power and the wealth are going up. And all of these purges, the purges in the Department of Defense and in the Justice Department. And
then the funding freezes. We haven't even talked about that. So on Monday, OMB says freezing everything. Then they try and rescind the freeze. And the judges are saying, you can't just do it and then rescind it. I mean, this is not kosher. What's happening with that?
Well, I think that Trump is setting up with the freezing of money. This is money that Congress, remember, has appropriated for running the entire federal government. The idea is, and it started with Richard Nixon, that the president has the authority to impound. That's quote unquote. That is, I'm not going to spend the money that Congress has given me or appropriated. Nixon said, guess what? Congress passed something called the Impoundment Control Act in 1974, and the Supreme Court found that it was constitutional in 1975. So there should be no question about it. But it does tie the hands of a president a little bit relative to Congress. I mean, Congress does have the power of the purse. That is what the Constitution of the United States says it has. But if you have a dictator, hello, that's what I'm using. I'm using the term dictator in the White House, in the Oval Office, who says, no, I don't want to. I want more bargaining leverage. I want to be able to stop funding I don't like, or I want to be able to stop funding and then negotiate with the recipients if they want something. I want something back. I mean, that's what this is all about. This is all about consolidating power.
Where is the Supreme Court right now? Because there's that memo that Roberts did in the 80s, I think it was 85, where he basically said, you can't use impoundment. This is not we can't let it be a viable budgetary planning option. This can't work. Is that memo going to come back and bite him?
Well, I think it may, if it gets up to the Supreme Court. I think it will get up to the Supreme Court. I think that the two least credible Supreme Court justices, Alito and Thomas, they might go along with what Trump wants. Roberts, it's very awkward. But remember, the Supreme Court in 1975 said this is constitutional. It was a 9-0 Supreme Court decision, Heather. This is a unanimous decision. Now, granted, this Supreme Court has not distinguished itself exactly with kind of being bound by precedent. Hence, what happened to with the abortion decision. But nevertheless, Trump is setting up some test cases to expand the authority of the person in the White House who happens to be Donald Trump. I mean, he looked at what Roberts did and the majority did on the presidential immunity case and says, well, maybe I should, I can count on them. I hope he can't count on them.
Me too. And how does this relate to the unitary executive theory? Thank you, Ronald Reagan.
I'm glad you brought that up because it's all part. A lot of the Republican justices came out of the Reagan and Bush 1 Justice Department and the Office of the Legal Counsel of the White House, where they were very intrigued and very, very supportive of this unitary executive theory, which would really consolidate all the power of the executive branch in the president. So you don't have independent regulatory agencies. You don't have any independent agencies. Now, I can't say whether they're still on to that. I don't know what they would do with the Trump, any of the Trump things. I mean, another thing that Trump did last week was he basically fired the chair of the Labor Committee, the National Labor Relations Board, and she was there by Congress. Congress created a statute, a law that gave her a tenure until 2028.
Right. This is Jennifer Abruzzo. Yeah.
Jennifer Abruzzo is the counsel, the chief counsel.
Forgive me.
He fired her as well.
Good.
But the point is that these were illegal. I mean, totally illegal firings. And by doing so, he makes the National Labor Relations Board only now has 2 members. The Supreme Court has said you can't make any laws with only 2 members. You would need 3 members. So with one swoop, Donald Trump has made the National Labor Relations Act and all labor laws enforced by the National Labor Relations Board basically nil. I mean, they're gone until you get somebody else there. And I don't think he's going to put somebody else in there.
No, it's easier to have them hamstrung if you're looking for control.
Yeah.
So then, since we last coffeed, also more security detail has been taken away from public servants. Let's be clear. So we had Mark Milley this past week. We had Bolton. We had Dr. Fauci. I mean, this is part of the same process, too.
Yes, and I think the press gets this wrong, Heather. Even the mainstream press are describing this as retribution for people like Fauci or Bolton who have crossed Trump in the past. But if you understand this in the terms that I've been giving you, and that is the consolidation of power, what Trump is really doing with all of these punishments is warning people who are currently in the government, currently officials, anybody who is potentially standing up to him. He's saying to them, don't try to cross me, because if you do, I'm going to make your life miserable in the future. If, for example, you do something that causes you to receive death threats, I'm going to take away your security detail, or I'm not going to give you a security detail. In other words, this is all about consolidating power. It's not just about retribution in the past.
And it's about this fog around him where we should all fear him, right? This,
it's
anticipatory obedience, and as Snyder says, some version of that. What is Snyder
Yes, the political scientist Snyder at Yale, he does talk about anticipatory obedience, and this is where fascism really comes
and obeying
in.
in advance. Obeying in advance.
You obey in advance. And what that means is that you're afraid of what he might do if you cross him. So you're going to give him wide berth. This is what's happening across corporate America. This is what's happening with the CEOs. I'm not talking about the CEOs like Zuckerberg and Bezos and Musk, who are obviously actively sucking up to him. I'm talking about the CEOs who are very afraid to say anything. They're absolutely, the silence of the major CEOs of America is extraordinary at a time like this. I mean, in the
silence of a lot of people.
A lot of people. That's
clear.
Right. Silence. It's the people who we think of in this society as leaders, religious leaders, or publishers, or even university presidents, or people who have some sort of responsibility, moral responsibility to the country, to democracy, they are silent. They're saying nothing.
Right.
And what about
And
Republicans?
an interpretive role. I feel like we need people to be interpreting. I mean, this is why love meeting you for coffee. I'm like, no, it's true. We're figuring it out. I mean, this is a horrible list of things, but somehow it makes me feel better to be increasing my understanding of what's happening. And I know other people have said that as well.
Well, I think this is
Who
this
else is
kind of
out there?
the shock and awe, this blitzkrieg, if you want to call it, this kind of flooding the zone is what Trump and his associates call it. This is all designed to make us so frantic, so immobilized that we can't even our brains can't even function. So it's very important that we see the whole for what it is. This is about. I mean, it's awful and it hurts a lot of people. And it is replacing democracy with dictatorship, and it is consolidating power as it has never been consolidated before.
But
in
Bob,
one
how do you
single
see?
person.
But how do you see the whole when the independent media is being, and the free press is being blown up and taken over by all these people? I mean, there were so many examples this week. There was Musk didn't like how Wikipedia listed the fact that he had done a aggressive salute, and so then he's saying, "Don't fund them."
An
and
aggressive
they're
salute. A Nazi salute.
I know. I know. And then the LA Times, you saw that yesterday. There was this op-ed about RFK Jr., and the physician who wrote it says that it was changed and it wasn't as pro RFK Jr. as the LA Times then made it. I mean, how do you get the information out? I mean, how do you know the truth if it's being warped?
Well, you have to rely on trusted sources of information, and unfortunately, you can't rely on the Republican Party. The Democrats are very quiet. I mean, we can get back to them. You can't rely on the usual sources because a lot of the usual sources are being intimidated, as we've talked about. This is part of this is the playbook. This is the dictatorship fascist playbook. And so you've got to find trusted sources. You've got to make sure that those trusted sources and the information they provide, you've got to repeat it, get it out to people. You've got to, every time you hear lies being uttered among your friends or acquaintances or people around you, you've got to make sure that they understand they are lies. You've got to set the record straight and continue to set the record straight. If you have relatives who are addicted to Fox News, try to help them. Get them an intervention. Get them out of that morass. I mean, it's a national emergency, Heather, in the sense that it is as bad, if not worse, as many of us had predicted. And it's happening so fast that a lot of people, as I said, are overwhelmed by it. But you've just got to understand it for what it is. It is consolidation of power. And there's a very methodical, detailed, clear blueprint. I'm not saying that Trump is a genius. He's not. He's the front man. He's a front man for the people who are really out to do this.
Also, I feel like there's a time when things are going well, you think, oh, I'm just going to fire everybody, and then the efficiencies will be gained and we'll be fine. You cannot tell me this is going to go well. I mean, he is not he and Musk are strategic geniuses. They know exactly who they're firing. They know exactly the domino effects and what's going to happen. There is going to be a mess.
Well,
right?
It's already a mess. It's already a mess. I mean, it's really, I can't tell you the number of people I know in the federal government at high levels. I mean, who are senior civil servants who have a very important work to do, who are tearing their hair out. There is
if they still have a job. I have multiple people. I got texts yesterday saying my boss was fired. I was fired. I'm trying to get the word out. We're trying to figure it out. I couldn't say goodbye to anyone. I mean, it's already bad, but
there's a human story, and that's a terrible story in terms of individuals and families that are suffering. like the aircraft crash and the people who on the ground, the undocumented workers and their families, and a lot of people who just have brown skin who are being asked by ICE to show and prove that they are Americans and are here legally. But there's that human story. But then there is this kind of dictatorial story, this background story that we have to understand because it is a direct frontal attack on democracy.
Now, I want to get into a few more specific actions we all can take and we all need to take. But first, today is the DNC chair will be elected, right? What are we anticipating around that?
Well, the Democratic National Committee, we want somebody, I mean, he's going to be elected, or I think there are only two men who are really prime candidates, going to be elected by a little over 400 people. That's the Democratic National Committee. It's all shrouded in secrecy. In fact, a lot of the people who are members don't even know how they got to be members. I've talked to people who used to be members who say they don't know how they are no longer members.
I can't take one more part of the system that's broken, Bob.
Well, Heather, I want to reassure you of one thing, and this is basic. On computers, there used to be a way of revealing the code. You push a certain key and it said reveal code. This is what's happening now. It's as if we are suddenly, all of us, able to see things we would not see otherwise if there were not this kind of national dictatorial emergency. And you push the reveal code, and I have faith. And maybe this is a Pollyanna crazy faith, but I have a faith, and we can go back into this if you want, that when Americans see what's actually happening, when the reveal code is pushed, a lot of people are going to say, no, I don't want this. I mean, even many people who voted for Trump are going to say, this is not the deal that I wanted. I'm going to just join a group, anybody who is going to get these people out of power as soon as I can. Now, it's the 2026 midterm elections. A lot of horrible things can happen between now and then, but I'm going to put pressure on my own members of Congress. If they're Republicans, I'm going to call them. I'm going to tell them that I'm not going to vote for them again if they don't put a stop to what's going on. I mean, there are a lot of things that people can do and should do.
But so are these people, you think, who will become disillusioned by Trump? Or are they, do you think, on average, are they going to be thinking, is it a working American who says, wait a second, this was not what I was promised? Or is it just someone so done with the overwhelm? I mean, what do you think the theme of the disillusionment is when it comes?
This comes back, to the DNC. The DNC leader has got to be outspoken about what's really happening and got to show the big story, the big picture. But I think the average American, most people in America, and I am, I've been around for a long time. I'm an old guy, and I've been around across America.
Don't say that. Just say you've been around a long time.
I've been around a long time. Most people in this country are decent people. They're hardworking people. They don't run around with MAGA hats or buttons. They want a country that is working for everyone. They want a democracy. They want prosperity. They don't want this craziness, and they don't want a dictator fascist supported by a Nazi saluting fascist, the richest person in the entire world. They don't want this. They don't want a oligarchy, and that's where Trump and Musk want to take us as fast as they possibly can. So I think that there's going to be a huge response by Americans, a huge backlash.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I know. I think so too. And when you say it, and you say it to the team at Inequality Media Civic Action, and we talk about it, I mean, it really is important to remember that. So, other actions we can take. So, you mentioned getting in touch with your electeds to advocate for people around you who are, in the throes, more so potentially. So, I think in the LGBT community, for example, you can push your legislatures to do pro-LGBTQ legislation, right? And
that's particularly true
Yeah.
at the state and local levels. You can codify protections for LGBTQ plus people.
Right.
You can make sure that anybody in your community who is potentially raided by immigration customs enforcement, whether they are here legally or not, they have rights. They don't have to, for example, talk to an ICE agent. They don't have to let them in their homes. In fact, they should not let them in their homes. There are rights. Make sure that the people understand their rights.
And the way people are doing this is there are red cards, right? You literally download red cards. Nonprofits have ordered hundreds of thousands of red cards, and people, undocumented people, have these red cards, and it says, know your rights. This is what's on there, and they feel empowered to the point that in Chicago this week, Trump's border czar said, people knew too much. They knew their rights. They were too educated. It was really hard to get anybody to scoop up the people we'd wanted to scoop up.
Yes, and we should be delighted that people knew their rights. I think that's a good experiment. Chicago was one of the target cities that ICE began raiding. And if people know their rights, it becomes very hard to do this. And it becomes very hard to separate families, and very hard to take perfectly law-abiding people who are here in the United States who have been working hard for years suddenly subjected to what are essentially Gestapo techniques. It's harder to do that if they know their rights. So yes, as an individual in the United States, you can help the LGBTQ community. You can also help vulnerable people in the undocumented community. And Heather, I mentioned this before. I'm getting more and more reports of people who have dark skin, brown skin, who look Latino, who are here legally. They're born in the United States. They're Americans, but who are being approached by, federal agents, immigration, customs agents, and who are being asked to show and prove that they are Americans. What kind of a country is this? That we don't allow this. And all the rest of us should stand up and say that.
Yep. And I think some people are, and not enough. As consumers, we have some wherewithal and agency too, right? I mean, we can be boycotting certain things.
Absolutely. Never underestimate the power of consumer boycotts. I would start with Tesla, and I would then go to, X. I would boycott advertisers on X. I would boycott advertisers certainly on Fox News. There are lists of these people around. I would get these lists out to other people because here's the thing: these corporations spend huge amounts of money on their brand images, boosting the brand images. If there is a movement to boycott and in any way damage those brand images, they are going to change their behavior.
And this is organizations that are enabling this power grab too, right? So the Washington Post, people have been unsubscribing. People have been unsubscribing to Amazon Prime, for example. So I think things holding up the oligarchy, right? All of these pieces of the private sector and of our free press and all of it, people are trying to put a wedge in there. And you're
saying we, as consumers, even if you're not going to pay attention to us as voters, but as consumers, we are not going to stand for Jeff Bezos and Amazon doing this. As consumers, we're not going to stand for Zuckerberg kind of doing this with regard to Meta. As consumers, we're not going to stand Meta. We're not going to stand for Elon Musk and his craziness that is now taking over a piece of America. We're not going to allow this.
And you can boycott stores and companies that are anti-union, right?
Absolutely. And by the way, Starbucks is a good example. There was a great deal of consumer anger directed at Starbucks because Starbucks would not even recognize. I mean, under the National Labor Relations Act, it had an obligation to recognize the stores that had unionized, and it would not even bargain with them. And it relented. Not as much as it should. Hopefully there will be more consumer action, but at least it pushed Starbucks to begin negotiating. And that's a good example.
And you've talked about there's still power in the courts. So one thing people can do is fund these organizations, nonprofits that are litigating against Trump and his agenda and the horrible things that are part of it.
Yes, that the ACLU, for example, is a real champion. The organization, I used to be chair of the board of Common Cause. Common Cause is a plaintiff in a lot of this litigation, does a lot of the litigation. There are a lot of other very, very good and important organizations that are taking the Trump administration to court. And we're going to see even more of it.
You have been doing this a long time. I mean, you've said that. I'm not going to say the OLD word. And then we talk about all this, and you were the first gubernatorial candidate to encourage same-sex unions and to mention it and sanction it. And that was in 2002, which seems late in the game to me. But, I mean, you have done so much, Bob.
Oh, come on.
You have. Let me ask you another question.
You're embarrassing me, and don't embarrass me. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Okay, in terms of getting out the truth and where to go, we hit on this a little bit earlier, but trying to find sources of news, which are those same sources you can try to send to your relatives who are looking at other sources. Where should we be looking? Where do you go?
Well, I go to Inequality Media.
Thank you.
For example, and you are the executive director of this wonderful organization.
Yeah, and you are often in the videos you're looking at.
And I go to... And I go to Substack, my Substack, for example, just to take one randomly. But there are many other places that I think have done a very, very good job, and I list them. And we could list. I don't want to use our valuable time going through the list. But yes, I have a list available to people if they want to look at that list.
And there is good journalism out there, and supporting good journalism is another something, and supporting NPR, as we know.
Exactly. NPR, which is threatened by the administration, ProPublica, which is a very, very important organization doing wonderful journalism. Just be out there and be an activist in favor of the things that are going well and need protection. Be an activist in favor of these groups that are doing wonderfully important work, be an activist in favor of protecting the vulnerable. I mean, this is a time when every one of us needs to stand up and do whatever we possibly can. Instead of just going around saying, oh, I can't believe it. Oh, I'm miserable. I mean, I understand that. I understand that people are freaking out. But instead of just freaking out, there's a lot you can and must do as we move into this darkness.
Yeah. Well, thank you for encouraging us to keep the faith. So this week I kept wondering, so watching RFK Jr., watching Hegseth in the past however many days, watching these hearings, these confirmation hearings, can you tell us a little more about yours? Because I wasn't there, and it wasn't on Twitter. There was no Twitter. Aaron Rupar wasn't there to pull a clip for me.
I don't think...
What happened at yours? Was it controversial?
I don't think you were born.
Yes, I was born. I was born in the 70s.
Well, then you should have been. You should have been there.
I should have been there. But so what? Tell us about it. Was it hugely controversial?
Well, it was. I was warned that it would be controversial. Mm-hmm. In fact, when you're preparing for these confirmation hearings, you have some people who are supplied by the incoming administration, who are part of the incoming administration, who are advisors who sit down with you and say, well, here are the likely questions you're going to get. So what are your answers? And here are the places you're vulnerable. And I'll never forget when one of them brought out, he said, you've written a lot, Professor Reich. I mean, at that time, that's where I was known, Professor Reich. You've written a lot, and a lot of a lot of people don't. It's been controversial. A lot of people, Republicans and people on the right, have attacked you. So you need to be very, very clear. And we've collected your writings that have been most controversial, and it was a 3-ring binder but it was about this thick. I thought, oh, there's no way I'm going to be able to go through this. And then
that was before your Substack.
And that's right. And then I saw, it said on the side of the binder, it said Reich Writings, controversial. And then it said Volume 1.
Oh, God.
Anyway.
But what were your numbers? What were your numbers?
Well, you mean the numbers in terms of votes?
How many? Yeah. Ayes and nays.
Well, it was 100 senators in favor of me, and there were 0 votes against me.
Wow.
I was
That's
surprised.
incredible to think about.
Well, it was a different era, Heather. It was,
I know. That's my point.
It was a time when there were Republicans who were reasonable. I mean, you could talk to them, and I visited with them, and I talked with them, and I persuaded them, I guess, that I was not some crazy.
And dissenting voices were allowed and encouraged. It was
yes, and the inequality, the gap in wealth, and the concentration of power we didn't have at that particular point in time. It was still 1992.
Well, so what I would like to do is pull from the archive, which is your least
Here we go
favorite
again.
part.
Here we go again.
But so let's just look at one quick clip from your confirmation hearing.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, both my parents worked. They worked hard. They worked 6 days a week. They owned a small business. They had 2 little clothing shops. They were basically all the workers and all the managers, the 2 of them. My dad, I remember, on Sundays, he'd come home and he would spend part of his Sundays working on the books, the accounts receivable and the inventories. Wasn't an easy way to make a living. They did it. They were the workers, they were the managers, and over the dining room table in the evening, I saw worker-management relationships at their best, and occasionally at their worst. But through that experience growing up, I can tell you I developed a keen appreciation of the needs and the plight of small business. I'm particularly sensitive to that. I remember Dad complaining about government paperwork, but I'll tell you something. When a flooded out one of his 2 little shops in a big hurricane, and we were almost finished, he came to the government, got a loan, a low-interest loan. It put him back on his feet, and we were, as a family, back running. The business was saved. If I am confirmed as Secretary of Labor, I will dedicate myself to the well-being of all Americans who work, who want to work, who must work. It will be truly the department of the American workforce, a center of America's strategy for economic growth. Thank you.
That was then.
I find that it was so heartening. It was so real, and the people behind you were kind of positive. We'll get back there.
I think we will. Watching that is a little bit moving. It makes me remember those days and remember my mother and father.
Sorry, I torture you with this.
Working so hard. No. I mean, it's a little embarrassing, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Good, because we appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I want to just a quick word to all the rest of you watching. Heather, thank you again. You're a wonderful partner and friend, and we couldn't do this without you. But I want to just say, we're now ending week 2 almost of this Trump regime. It's not. I'm not saying Trump administration. It is a regime. It is a regime that is bent on consolidating power in one man, because if power is consolidated and democracy is undermined, it makes it easier for a relatively few number of extraordinarily wealthy people, Elon Musk on down, to take over and gain even more wealth. This is what an oligarchy looks like. This is what we have to fight against. This is the problem, the central problem we are up against. And we see it, and you see it, and we will prevail. Thank you all. Have a good week.